Julian Moreau, once hailed as a titan of the tech world, now wandered through life like a ghost in his own empire. Every headline praised his genius, but not one ever whispered the name that haunted his nights: Elise. Her absence had carved a hollow in his chest, where laughter used to live. To the world, he was brilliance embodied. Behind closed doors, he was just a man tangled in an emotional story too heavy to share. This was no touching stories fairy tale. This was a real story of grief wrapped in golden silence.
Hello, I'm going to tell you this incredible story. Put on your headphones for a better experience and sit comfortably because you're going to be moved. Remember that to receive new stories like this, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell. Without further ado, let's get to the rest of the story.
For years, Julian filled boardrooms but emptied his heart. His mansion, though grand, echoed with loneliness that money couldn't hush. Friends faded, replaced by meetings and cold reports. It was easier to lose himself in work than face the quiet that followed him home. Still, a part of him, buried deep, ached to feel again, to step outside the shadows and let some warmth in. That warmth came as a suggestion, barely more than a whisper from an old friend who refused to give up on him. One night, the friend said, just one night to breathe again. Julian sighed, resistant. But something about the idea, an upscale lounge in Manhattan, live piano, no expectations, nudged him toward yes. It wasn't the kind of place a grieving tycoon usually visited. And yet, that night, something in the air felt curiously deliberate. The lounge shimmered with soft lights and the clinking of elegant glasses. Conversations danced like jazz notes, but Julian sat alone, cloaked in thought. He almost turned back, but then he remembered Elise, how she once loved moments like these. Her voice used to say, "You never know when life decides to surprise you." It wasn't courage that kept him seated. It was the echo of her hope. As he sipped his drink, time slowed. The pianist adjusted his bench. And in that single breath of anticipation, something shifted. It wasn't the melody that struck first. It was the voice. A woman's voice, so familiar, it stole the ground from beneath Julian's feet. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing in disbelief. Could grief play tricks like that? Or is this something more? The song poured like honey over glass, graceful yet precise. His heart pounded in time with the chords. This wasn't just a performance. It was a memory, a message. Elise's lullaby. Hers alone, suddenly alive in the voice of a stranger. Julian gripped the edge of the table, his soul unraveling. This emotional story wasn't over. It had just shifted keys. And somewhere between the trembling of his hands and the stillness of that note, Julian realized something strange. Real stories don't always end in goodbyes. They sometimes loop back to beginnings in the most unexpected ways. And just like that, he wasn't thinking about leaving anymore. He was thinking about staying, just long enough to hear the rest of the song. The room vanished. Not literally, of course, but in Julian's mind, nothing else existed. That voice had cracked open something inside him, something that had been sealed shut since Elise's final breath. It was more than nostalgia. It was like the universe had bent time just to deliver this moment. The emotional story of his life was now echoing from the lips of a stranger. The melody wasn't similar, it was exact. Every pause, every tender lift of tone, matched the lullaby Elise used to hum on sleepless nights. Julian had never shared that song with anyone. It wasn't in any record or playlist. It lived only in memory. So how could this woman, this elegant singer in a red silk dress, know it? Was it madness? Or were some touching stories just destined to unfold? He stared at her, heart thundering. Livia Dane. The name floated through whispered conversations like perfume through a corridor. But Julian couldn't process the details. Her name didn't matter, not yet. What mattered was the way her voice carried more than sound. It carried Elise. And in that haunting familiarity, something fragile and real began to stir. People around him clapped as the song ended, but Julian barely heard them. His mind was still in the past, wrapped in warm hands and soft whispers. He wasn't a billionaire anymore, not in that instant. He was just a man who missed someone more than words allowed. A man suddenly transported by a song that should have died with her but didn't. That's the thing about real story moments. They don't ask for logic, only presence. He needed to speak to her, but his body felt glued to the seat. How do you approach someone who just unknowingly sang your soul back to life? Still, something pushed him, something deeper than curiosity. It was longing, yes, but also reverence. He wasn't chasing romance. He was following a thread woven by fate itself. This wasn't coincidence. It felt like a calling. As Livia stepped off the stage, she glanced his way. Briefly, almost like she sensed something too. Julian took that as his cue and stood. Every step toward her weighted with meaning. He didn't know what he'd say, only that he had to say something. Anything. When life hands you touching stories like this, you don't let them pass. You walk straight into them. And just like that, he was standing before her. Not as a CEO, not as a man of power, but as someone cracked wide open by a voice. That song, he began, voice low, uncertain. Livia smiled politely, unaware of the storm she had awakened. But oh, how quickly things can change when music becomes more than melody, when it becomes memory itself. Julian's voice trembled as he offered her a drink, his eyes still dazed from what he'd just heard. He didn't try to impress her. There was no charm, no calculated confidence, only raw reverence. Livia noticed it instantly, not the kind of attention she was used to, but something gentler, something that made her pause. It felt like the start of an emotional story that neither of them expected. They sat near the window, the city shimmering beneath them like stars spilled across the earth. Julian tried to explain, carefully, that her song had struck a nerve so deep he could hardly breathe. He didn't mention Elise by name yet, but the ache in his eyes told enough. Livia listened, not with the performance mask artists often wear, but with quiet sincerity. And when she responded, it wasn't small talk. It was curiosity born of something invisible between them. The melody just came to me one night, she said, her brows furrowing. I wasn't even trying to write anything. I woke up with it in my head. That moment hit Julian like thunder. His heart whispered 1,000 things, but all he said was it wasn't just a song. And Livia, with a small nod, whispered back, I know. There are touching stories that feel written long before two people meet. This felt like one of them. Julian leaned in slightly, still stunned. Could something like this truly be coincidence? Or was there something more at work? Elise used to say the soul speaks through music, and maybe, just maybe, she was right. Livia didn't brush it off. She didn't laugh or doubt him. Instead, she leaned closer too, as if drawn by the same invisible thread. This wasn't flirtation. It was recognition, quiet and mutual. Their conversation stretched across the next hour like a soft jazz progression, surprising and soulful. Livia opened up in return, sharing her dreams, her doubts, her love for timeless melodies that always made her feel things she couldn't explain. They weren't exchanging facts. They were unspooling parts of themselves in real time. It was a real story moment. Unexpected, magnetic, and undeniably human. Something flickered between them, not like lightning, but like candlelight. Subtle, patient, yet unwavering. Julian found himself laughing softly for the first time in what felt like ages. Livia noticed it too. Not just the sound, but the relief behind it. It was the kind of laugh that breaks after years of silence. The kind you hear in the best emotional story endings. Except this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something rare. And though they said good night with a simple handshake, something lingered. A charge, a whisper of what could come next. Julian walked out into the cool Manhattan night, feeling strangely alive. Music had brought him back from a place where even hope dared not go. And now, with that voice echoing in his mind, he wasn't just remembering Elise. He was wondering, what if some songs were meant to lead you somewhere new? Their meetings became more frequent, but never planned. Julian would return to the lounge, unsure if Livia would be there, and yet she often was. They didn't rush things. No promises, no pressure, just two people sharing space, stories, and sometimes silence. And in that stillness, they found something sacred, something only those who've lived an emotional story can recognize. Julian opened up slowly, like a book with delicate pages. He spoke of Elise, not in grief, but in reverence. He told Livia about their long walks in autumn parks, their late-night talks about stars and eternity, and the way her lullaby would quiet storms inside him. Livia didn't flinch. She didn't try to fix his pain or turn the page. She listened, and that listening became its own kind of love. She began to wonder, how could she know a melody that had never been written? How had it appeared in her dreams, clear as if whispered by a ghost? It unsettled her, but also moved her deeply. Maybe songs weren't just songs. Maybe they were messages, timeless, soul-carried. And perhaps, in this real story, she was more than a singer. Maybe she was a bridge between then and now. They started walking together after shows. Long, quiet strolls beneath city lights that blurred like watercolor paintings. They didn't hold hands, but their steps always aligned, like hearts beating to the same invisible metronome. Julian would point to buildings and share memories. Livia would hum softly beside him, sometimes the very tune that brought them together. These weren't dates, they were rituals. Healing, human, whole. Livia noticed the way Julian still wore his wedding ring. Not out of guilt, but out of honor. She didn't ask him to remove it. She understood something most people wouldn't. Love doesn't vanish, it transforms. This wasn't a competition with a ghost. It was something else entirely. A delicate dance between memory and presence, between goodbye and hello. For Julian, Livia wasn't replacing Elise. She was reminding him that life, even after great loss, could still surprise you. He started sleeping better, breathing deeper, smiling at things he used to ignore. Children laughing, street performers singing off-key. The touching stories he once feared living again were now unfolding before him, one ordinary moment at a time. And beneath all this, a question lingered, soft but insistent. Could love truly find its way back through music? Could melody really carry a soul forward, instead of holding in the past? Julian didn't have the answer yet, but he was beginning to believe in the magic of connection again. And Livia? She was beginning to feel like maybe her voice was never just hers to begin with. The shift was subtle, like a season changing overnight while the world slept. Julian didn't wake up one day in love. It came in waves, each one softer and more certain than the last. It was in the way Livia looked at him when he forgot to guard his heart, in the way she never asked for more than he could give. The emotional story of his healing wasn't loud. It was patient and profoundly real. He stopped feeling guilty for smiling. For years, joy had felt like betrayal. But now, when Livia laughed at something he said, he found himself laughing too, without hesitation. It was strange how grief made room for joy, not by erasing what came before, but by honoring it. That's how real story healing works. It layers, it builds, it breathes. Love didn't replace Elise. It grew beside her memory, like light beside shadow. Livia saw it too, not just the pain, but the transformation. She admired Julian not because he was powerful, but because he was learning to be vulnerable. And she, in turn, felt changed by his presence. She became more fearless on stage, more open in her lyrics. Every song carried traces of him now, not directly, but woven between the notes. These weren't just touching stories, they were living ones. They started spending time beyond the lounge, brunches in quiet cafes, bookstores that smelled of old paper and dust, spontaneous walks in the rain. No grand gestures, just presence. That was enough. They were building something, not over the ruins of the past, but beside it. A new wing on a house that had withstood storms. Julian often said, "It feels like Elise gave us her blessing." And somehow, Livia believed him. There was a peace to the way he remembered his wife, and a beauty in the way he now looked at her. It wasn't haunted, it was whole, as if Elise's love hadn't ended, just changed form, now singing through someone new, guiding his heart gently forward. One evening, under a navy blue sky freckled with stars, Julian took Livia's hand. He didn't ask anything. He didn't promise anything. He just held it, like someone who had finally found the courage to feel again. and Livia held back, not to claim him, but to honor what they'd both discovered, a love that didn't compete with the past, but embraced it. There, beneath the vast silence of the night, something settled between them. Not fireworks, not declarations, just a knowing, a shared breath in the middle of a shared story. And in that moment, with the city humming softly around them, neither needed words to understand. Sometimes, when music leads the way, love follows with quiet grace. Julian had spent years believing his heart would never beat for anything beyond memory. Yet here he was, feeling again, not because he tried, but because life, in its quiet wisdom, brought him a voice that stirred something buried deep. Livia didn't rescue him. She simply stood beside him until he remembered who he used to be. That's the beauty of an emotional story. It doesn't always arrive with drama. Sometimes, it enters as a whisper. They didn't chase forever. They lived one day at a time, building joy slowly, like a song unfolding one verse after another. Elise was never pushed aside. Her presence was honored in every story Julian told. In every moment he paused to reflect. Livia understood this. She never tried to fill a void. She became something new entirely. Not a substitute, a continuation, a quiet proof that touching stories can hold more than one kind of love. Livia's music changed, subtly but unmistakably. Her fans noticed it too. The melancholy that once hung over every note gave way to warmth, to color, to hope. Her voice, still rich with feeling, now carried the kind of peace only real story healing can bring. Julian, though never one to crave the spotlight, became the steady rhythm beneath her melody. Her quiet muse, her listener, her safe place. One evening, they sat on the rooftop of Julian's brownstone, wrapped in a shared blanket as the city shimmered below. Stars blinked above them, and the same lullaby that once came to Livia uninvited now rested gently on her lips. She sang it not to Elise, not to Julian, but to life itself, to the mysterious, generous life that dared to give broken hearts a second verse. Julian looked at her then, not with the ache of a man haunted, but with the calm of a man fulfilled. "She would have liked you," he said softly. "She would have loved your heart." Livia's eyes filled with quiet emotion, and all she did was nod. There was no jealousy, no tension, just gratitude for what had been and what had become. This was love's gentle return, not loud but lasting. They never married. They never needed to. Their bond went deeper than rings or ceremonies. It lived in daily kindness, in mutual understanding, in shared silence. And that was enough. Julian had found peace, not in forgetting Elise, but in loving someone new without erasing the old. A love layered, honest whole. One more chapter in an emotional story worth telling. And as the years passed, people would often ask Livia where that one haunting melody came from, the one that started it all. She'd smile and say, "It came to me in a dream." But deep down she knew, some touching stories don't need explanations. Some real story endings are really just new beginnings, disguised as a final note. Do you believe a song can carry someone's soul? Have you ever experienced something so powerful it felt like the universe was trying to tell you something? If you were Julian, would you have opened your heart again, or kept it locked away? This emotional story reminds us that real love doesn't always end. Sometimes it just finds a new way to speak. And maybe, just maybe, our deepest connections live on in ways we can't explain. Now tell me, what part of this touching story moved you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more real stories that stir your heart and make you believe in the impossible, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. The next one might just change the way you see love forever.